All right, well, we're going to have people continuing to trickle in. I know that we have a lot of people from in the States and even from across the pond. So let's get started. And if you have any questions, you can ask them in the chat below and we will try and get back to them as quick as possible. Welcome to Navigating Change, Tools for Facing into the Storm with Dusty Staub. Before we get started, I wanted to point out the Q&A at the bottom of your screens. If you look next to, it's a little Q&A. And during the presentations, as questions arise for you, please enter them here. If you prefer to stay anonymous with your questions, you can check that box accordingly. At the end of the session, Dusty will respond to your questions. We will do our best to get to as many of them as possible. In addition, we will post a recording of tonight's webinar and send you a link. This is our first webinar, so please excuse the team as we navigate this new platform. However, we can assure you that Dusty definitely knows what he's speaking about. And now, let me introduce our presenter, Dusty Staub. Many of you already know him, but some of you may not. Let me share just a little of his background. Dusty has been helping individuals. My audio. Okay. Dusty has been helping individuals, teams, and organizations to be their best for more than 40 years. He started his career as clinical and then executive director of crisis centers and as a marital and family therapist in private practice. He moved on to join a behavioral science consulting firm where he became the head of leadership development. In 1990, he founded his own leadership development team and offers his work under EQ-IQ Leadership as well as Staub Leadership International. He has served as a certified forum facilitator for the Young Presidents Organization and is a fellow in the School of Engineering at Virginia Tech. He is the author of 4 published books and more than 200 articles. In his consulting work going back to 1985, Dusty pioneered the importance of psychological safety as well as the integration of emotional intelligence, EQ, with strategic thinking and business skills, the IQ of running an organization. And now, here is Dusty Staub.
Thank you, Kendra. The intent of this webinar is threefold. One is to deepen your understanding and your insight into change dynamics, especially second-order change. Second is to provide some methodologies, a process, some tools, and an orientation for navigating the rough waters when we're going through really disruptive change. And the third reason is to begin to build a network of support and resources that help everybody in terms of moving forward. Now, the slide I want you to take a look at right now has to do with a study that was done by IBM Services back in 2011, where they interviewed 1,500 CEOs, global CEOs across multiple industries across the world. More than half of those CEOs in 2011 said that their organizations were poorly equipped to be able to handle increased complexity, to handle change and change dynamics. And one of the fundamental findings that these CEOs over and over kept talking about was the key skill for moving forward for their organizations, their business, for the future, was going to be creativity. The ability to be able to be creative and innovative and to roll and adapt with change. Well, given what's going on in the world right now, everything that's happening, think about that. If that was 2011, and here we are in 2020, we're dealing with this pandemic, think about organizations and how equipped they might be. How equipped is your organization, yourself, and your team to deal with change? Now, one of the most important things to deal with this new landscape is really understanding that there are 3 fundamental responses to change. And I want to talk about that for a second, because change, the biggest problem with change isn't the intellectual task, it's the emotional reactivity to it. Disruptive change, threatening change, sudden change brings up fear, anxiety, can bring up frustration, can bring up a real sense of anger, can bring up a sense of resentment, can bring up a sense of cynicism, a sense of being disillusioned, and maybe even depressed. So dealing with all of those emotional waves is something that we as individuals and leaders have to handle, and also deal with ourselves and our own families. Now, the three responses to all of this emotionality, number one is paralysis. That is, I don't know what to do. Or it's denial. This ain't happening. It ain't going to happen. This is not, we've heard a lot of denial. We've heard some paralysis. The second, and just about as ineffective way to respond, is panic. Okay, let's move. We're going to make this decision. We're going to do this right now. We're going to make this happen. And you take preemptive actions without thinking it through. Both of those, if you think about change as huge waves, both of those mean you're going to be knocked on your tail, knocked out, or knocked away in terms of what's going on. The third way to deal with change, and the most effective way of dealing with change, is really to accept it. If you can't quite embrace it, at least accept that it's going on, that you have to deal with it, and be ready to move with that change in terms of moving forward so that you can really be effective. So this discussion tonight is really about how you do number three. And number three is really required when you're dealing with a second order change. Now, there's two kinds of change. The textbooks will tell you there's first order change, which is you're making changes within the existing game. The rules, the logic that you've used has worked for you. It continues to work for you. It's a simple application of using logic and problem solving within the framework that I understand, my paradigm. Second order change is when there's been so much disruption and things have shifted so dramatically that I'm going to have to step into a different paradigm. I was talking to Joyce, our chief creative officer, and he used the image of OS, the operating system. He said, you have a computer, you have your phones on the old OS, the operating system, and there's certain functions it can't do, and after enough time, it just won't function at all. So in a way, when you're dealing with second order change, you have to change the operating system. You have to step your OS up. And that's for yourself, your team, your organization. What are the new rules? And those new rules, those new ways of being can fundamentally violate some of the old assumptions I had about the way things are supposed to work. So we have to be willing to understand that sometimes solving the problem may come across as really illogical. Now, when you deal with this kind of change, it's our state of consciousness that is really the key. How change enabled am I? How creative can I be? How mentally flexible can I be? How emotionally resilient am I? All of those aspects go into that change in consciousness. And two examples come to mind for me. One is the story of Jim Eppinger, who Max Dupree's father, I think it was E.J. Dupree, were talking, and Max Dupree, who took over the Herman Miller Corporation, was the CEO for a number of years, was relating this story. And he said he was listening to his dad almost speaking apologetically to Jim Eppinger, who was head of sales for Herman Miller at the time in the Great Depression. He was apologizing for the time he came to Jim's house and there were no Christmas trees, there were no Christmas presents because they didn't have the money. And even though Jim had earned all of these commissions, the company didn't have the money to pay him. And Jim looked at Max's father and he said, you know, my wife and I considered that night one of the highlights of our life. And Max's father goes, how could that be a highlight? I was the CEO. I couldn't pay you what you'd earned. You couldn't buy presents for your kids. He says, don't you remember? That was the night you gave me the New York territories. That was the night you expanded my capacity for sales and growth for the future. Now that's a change of consciousness. That's a different way of looking at things. You look at the glass is half empty. It's leaking. Oh my goodness. Hey, the glass is half full. Look what we can do with it. Another example that comes to mind is a person that I've admired named Richard Alpert. Richard Alpert was a psychologist at Harvard University, a professor, began experimenting with LSD. Some people said he lost his mind. He went to India, studied with a guru, and changed his name to Ram Dass, came back and actually touched hundreds of thousands of people with uplifting consciousness, helping people to think and see in new ways, to understand there's a different way to play, a different way of enjoying your life, a different way of living. And he was a teacher for me. I learned a lot and got a lot of value from the things he had to say. Now that was a major disruption, a major change for him. Then there was a further change. Later in life, he had a stroke. Couldn't walk, couldn't talk. Now, for most of us, for probably all of us, that would be, oh no, this is horrible, this is terrible. Within the old operating system, I've got to get back to my normal function. I've got to be restored. I've got to be fixed. I'm broken, something's wrong. Well, Ram Dass had been playing with consciousness for a number of years. It was, look at how people love me. Look at how people are carrying me around. Look at how people are taking care of me. Look at how people are making sure that I'm okay. And it was a sense of being carried around at first like a king, being fed, being taken care of. And he had to learn to speak again. But in his speaking, when he was talking, he had to speak slower and he had to speak in a much more careful way to people, which really made him much more effective. And it deepened his understanding. So a business story, a personal story, it really is that state of consciousness. And are we ready to really move forward? Now, when we're dealing with second order change, when the rules have changed, when the operating system is different, when the game is no longer what it used to be, we've found that there are 4 fundamental steps that can really help you move forward. And the first step is to clearly define the problem. Clearly make sure you understand the problem and that you've clearly defined what it is. And many times organizations jump to a conclusion. Eduardo da Silva, who's head of consulting services for us, was relating a story how one of our initial clients said, we need your help because we have poor teamwork. And Eduardo said, well, that's a symptom. What's the problem? Well, people are in conflict. They're not getting along with each other, arguing with each other. And he said, well, that's a symptom. What's the problem? Well, our meetings run much too long. It's taking much too long for us to get things done. And again, Eduardo said, now that's a symptom. What's the problem? And it forced the CEO to step back for a moment and look at Eduardo and say, I'm not quite sure. In a 15, 20-minute conversation, they got down to what the fundamental issue was and what the ground of being was in terms of the problem. And the problem had to do with people had lost faith in the organization. They'd lost trust. There was a lack of psychological safety. So people didn't feel they could speak up, they could offer their ideas, that they could share their concerns. And there were some behaviors on the leadership side that had led to that. Well, and that was the problem. Now, the second step, besides being really clear on what the problem is defining what have you tried? What are your attempted solutions? Well, the attempted solutions had been, we're going to put up posters everywhere, positive posters talking about great teamwork. We're going to exhort everybody to play better. We're going to start showing short videos about the quality of great teamwork. We're going to set up a scoring system to see who is the best teams. None of these activities were doing anything. So once you've clearly defined the problem, outline all of the attempts to solve the problem, make sure you're solving for the right problem. And if those attempts aren't working, you need to try something new. You need to try something different. It may be that you're in a change process where you need to operate in a different operating system. So what would be the change? And the change had to do, well, I'll get to that in a second. Third is once you've identified the problem, once you've identified the attempted solutions, is third, be really clear what your goal is. Really define that goal. Be crystal clear on what the goal is in terms of how you want to move forward. And that can be difficult because the same executive was saying, well, we want to have great teamwork. Okay, that's too diffuse. Can you be clear? We want people to feel safe and that they can speak up and be heard and their thoughts will be considered. Great. That's something we can do. That's a goal. And we can actually measure how we're doing and we can break it into behavioral steps. And then step 4 comes in. What are the process steps, the action steps you're going to take that are going to allow you to really reach that goal, not trying to use the old solutions that weren't working for you to really solve the issue of the problem that you have. When you're dealing with second order change, these 4 rules, these 4 guidelines can be extremely helpful to you. There's lots of tools and processes and questions and so forth that you can fold in under it. That's really the bare bones of it, the skeleton of being able to navigate and move through change most successfully. Now, one of the things that this requires is a different order of thinking. It means being able to focus on what, not why. Why did this happen can lead to endless excuses. What happened is descriptive. What do we want to have happen is descriptive about where we want to go. What are we going to need to do to fix this? What do we have to do different? And instead of who, we ask how. How will we fix this? What can I do? How can I help? What will you do? How will you help? How will we know we're being successful? So the hows and the whats, instead of the whys and the whos, really are a big change in terms of moving forward. And then the other piece is moving into positive action, not blame. I don't really want to assign blame. I want to know what we're going to do to fix it and what we're going to do to make sure this doesn't happen again. I want to know what we're going to do to really be able to move forward together in concert in a more effective way. And one of the best ways to do this is engage multiple perspectives. Now, a model of excellence, I'm going to share two models of excellence with you tonight, two organizations. One of those models of excellence is an organization called Clements Worldwide. Now, Clements provides solutions for expats all around the world, and they've been around for over 70 years. Clements is a jewel of an organization. And when this pandemic was just the outlines of it being formed, John Clements, the chairman, said, you know, this doesn't look good. Not quite sure what's going to happen. There's two things I know that are really important. One, we take care of our people, make sure they're safe and okay. And second, we make sure the organization can survive, that we have the margin to be able to invest and to get through this tough time and to try to do it together. That was a great philosophy, a great orientation to deal with the change that was coming. It's a larger perspective. And then Tarun Chopra, his CEO, who's building a great leadership team, pulled his team together and said, all right, they sent everybody home about 2 weeks before just about anybody else. At the same time, they said, now we're working remotely. And he pulled together that executive committee, his senior management team, and they began talking to each other about scenarios, creating, well, if this happens, what will we do? If this happens, what are the financial implications? How can we balance that? And so with the creative solutions and scenario creation based on that solid foundation, philosophical foundation that John, as chairman, had outlined, Tarun and his team began to put together strategies and tactics and plans and specific actions across multiple scenarios to be as prepared as they could be. The other thing is they made sure that they were talking to each other every day, and they made sure there was good communication throughout the organization. And that significantly, everybody took big cuts in their pay, percentage-wise, across the company, so they could hold on to talent rather than lay people off and then later go out and have to hire people. But also as part of that philosophy, we want to take care of people, make sure they're safe, and let's make sure the organization can survive and thrive. Really, really excellent behavior that I recommend thinking about. When we get into talking about these emotions, we talk about change. You cannot talk about change without understanding the emotional drivers, the emotional keys to change. And there are 4 emotional keys to dealing with change that are really important. The first one has to do with core orientation. You're going to deal with all this anxiety, all this fear, all this doubt, all this uncertainty, all of these emotions. If we know who we are, if we know why we're here, we know our core purpose, that gives us a storm anchor to keep us head on into the waves. It gives us a gyroscope that helps keeps us upright. When we get knocked over, we come back. And that gyroscope is that sense of who we are and why we're here. If you're feeling a bit lost right now, if you're feeling really uncertain about yourself or your organization, it could be that your core orientation, your core purpose has been defined too small. If it's been defined by the income coming in, if it's been defined by the status, if it's been defined by the identity of a role, That's too small. What is the core orientation that's bigger than this moment, that's bigger than this event, that's bigger than a role or a situation? That's core orientation. And that's going to give you a real strength. Simon Sinek did a wonderful talk on the Golden Circle, really about knowing your core why. That average organizations focus on what they do and how they do it. Great organizations focus on their why. And have you focused on your why? What is your core purpose and your orientation? That doesn't change. Even if how you do business begins to shift and change, that doesn't. Even if the life events around you change, you don't, because you know who you are and what's there. The second key to emotional intelligence key is being able to shift perspective. And I think about my grandmother, Marcy Haynes. Marcy was an old Southern Baptist, poor, had 10 children. 10th child was my mother, Jeannie. And what I learned from Marcy taught me a lot about emotional intelligence. She said, Dusty, now when someone acts like a pig, don't you act like one too. You'll get filthy and muddy. You won't enjoy it, and the pig will. Always take the high road. You never lose when you take the high road. Now, every once in a while in life, I want to get down into the mud, and I want to get in there with somebody. And if I can just pause for a moment and channel Marcy Haynes, my grandmother, and remember those words, they've saved me a lot of mudslinging. They saved me from getting filthy. And she is right. Taking the high road every time has paid off. Because when I haven't, I always see the difference. So who are some of the mentors or some of the voices? It could be a grandfather, could have been a mother, a father, could be a friend, could have been an old teacher, could have been a supervisor, could be somebody in your life now, could be your mate, could be one of your kids. Who are the people that help you remember to shift perspective? This too shall pass. 10 years from now, what difference will this make? This is where the old saying, WWBD, what would Buddha do? Or WWJD, what would Jesus do? It is that ability to shift perspective and think in a larger way. It's moving to the 50,000 foot. And it's that larger perspective that actually is a shift in the operating system that allows you to see more creative solutions to the situation you're dealing with now, especially when you're dealing with second order change. The third emotional driver that's really critically important as you move forward is one of resilience. In fact, a lot of the people who are gurus on change talk about resilience as the key. I think it's one of the keys. I do think core orientation, and I do think being able to shift perspective is really important. Resilience is the ability to bounce back. Fall down 7 times, get up 8. Being able to get up one more time than you fall down. It's the ability to bounce back. And resilience is the capacity to take some blows, take some setbacks, be knocked down, maybe knocked out, and recover, being able to move forward. And there are different kinds of resilience. There's physical resilience. Physical resilience comes from exercise, from stretching. I've been doing yoga for 45 years, which really keeps me flexible and has really helped me in my life. It also helps with mental flexibility. So beyond the exercise and diet and sleep, there's mental flexibility. In fact, mental rigidity. My old boss, James Noble Farr, Dr. Farr, used to say that there was a major disease that was epidemic and endemic in American corporations. He said it's hardening of the categories. It's when our categories become hardened and our thinking becomes rigid. And a great example from that from literature is Victor Hugo's Les Miserables, where you have the police inspector Javert, who is pursuing Jean Valjean, who escaped from prison 20 years before. Jean Valjean has had a conversion. He's actually become a saint and has really been helping people. But Javert knows he's a criminal and cannot change. And there comes a moment where Jean Valjean could let Javert be killed, but he saves his life. Javert cannot understand it. And when it comes time for Javert to take Jean Valjean in, he can't. Yet he can't accept that he's changed. And the rigidity is such that he kills himself. He commits suicide because he can't live with the fact that he's wrong and he can't admit he's wrong. That mental rigidity has led to a lot of suffering and a lot of pain, not only in corporations, but in society, in families and individuals. So building that mental flexibility, there are tools to do that. There's also emotional resilience. And emotional resilience has to do with feeding your heart, connecting with people. My friend Lisa talks about the fact that we're using the word social distancing when it's really physical distancing. We need the social connection. We need the connectivity. We need the sense of caring. We need that sense of heart space. We need the physical distance, but not the social distance. And there's a difference there. And then there's something I like to call spiritual resilience, which is the ability to feel like I'm part of something much larger, something bigger than myself, that I can tie into that presence. And that gives me a greater acceptance of what's going on physically. Helped Ram Dass, for example. That spiritual resilience, just give you a very deeply personal story. With our first child, my wife went into preterm labor. And we rushed to the hospital, and they had her in the room, and they were giving her medications, and the contractions wouldn't stop, and we were afraid we were going to lose the baby. And she was crying because she'd been working. She's a doctor. She'd been putting in lots of hours. I was crying because I thought we were going to lose the baby, and I felt guilty. And in all of that, as we're sitting there and we're looking at this possible horrible change of losing this baby that in utero we called Zorba Aloysius. We weren't sure of the sex. And when he was born, I was not allowed to name him Zorba. At any rate, as we're there and we're going through this moment, this horrible moment, suddenly it's like, I don't know, voice, spiritual, an angel, whatever you want to call it, came down, and I felt this presence. And it was, if this is the last moments, I said this to my wife, if these are the last moments we have with this baby, let's pour all the love we can into him. Let's really feed all the love. And so I don't know how long, we both just started pouring love into that little baby in utero. And 15, 20 minutes later, the contractions stopped. She was on bed rest for many, many weeks, but he was born healthy and strong and whole. That's a shift. The OS went from, oh no, oh no, oh no, this is horrible, 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 guilt, 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 to, what a gift, blessings, let me love. And love can be a great part of that spiritual resilience too. All right. So the last of the emotional intelligence drivers or keys has to do with confidence. When I was back in January, I was in Ireland, and I walked into a coffee shop in Cork. And I had a rough flight over from the States. It was about 7-8 hours. I hadn't had any sleep. I was feeling a little irritable. And I'm walking up to the front, and there in a handwritten note at the very front of the coffee shop said, "Congratulations, you've already survived the very worst things that have ever happened to you." Well, I had to laugh. And I had a great cup of coffee. And that is the key. We've all gone through adolescence. We've all gone through heartbreak. Many of us have gone through the loss of loved ones. We've all seen terrible times, hard times, difficult times, and yet we're still here. We survived. That confidence that this too shall pass, that we will live through this, that we will get through this, is a very important emotional driver. So can you engage your core orientation and purpose for yourself, your team, and organization? Can you help shift perspective to reframe and see things in maybe some new ways, a new operating system? Because we have a new norm. Can you build the resilience individually for teams and organizations? There are ways to do that. And are you building your confidence, the confidence of others? And when your confidence is down, do you talk to somebody? Say, hey, remind me that we'll get through this. So like Jim Eppinger's perspective at the Herman Miller Corporation in the middle of the Great Depression. So all of these things are critical for us. And the workplace impact for organizations is really kind of a tremendous challenge for everybody as we go through that. Now, the emotional intelligence keys to change, which is very, very disruptive. Viktor Frankl, who was in a concentration camp, engaged those. Nelson Mandela, who was locked up in prison for 27 years, came out with more love and more hope and more positivity. than when he went in. Maya Angelou, who wrote the wonderful book, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, and had some tremendously traumatic things happen to her as a little girl. Yet her positivity, her love, her inspiration for many. I also think of people like, well, Steve Jobs, who came back to Apple and reinfused in Apple its core sense of purpose, brought back that sense of resilience, brought back a sense of confidence, and really shifted the perspective, really changed the OS, the operating system, dramatically. So those are things you can engage. Now, the thing I want you to get is the power to change is inside you. The power to change is inside all of us. And that power to change really has some elements to it. The first is presence. The most important thing you can do when you're going through change is to resonate and connect with other people. Can you be present with their fear, their anxiety, their pain? Can you hear them? Not try to fix it. Be there and share with them your pain, your anxiety, that you hear them, you connect with them, and meet them there without judging them. That sense of connectivity is a huge support, and letting them know that you're there for them in that moment that way. Second is really listening to connect. So that I don't listen to fix a problem, I'm listening to connect. What's this person feeling? What's going on? How can I best connect with them now in this moment? What's happening? The ability to step back and reframe, that's the shifting the operating system, to reframe the reality to a larger perspective. You know, this looks like a really interesting opportunity, cleverly disguised as a dramatic problem, is a reframe for that. A colleague of mine years ago when I was a young therapist pulled me aside one day and she said, Dusty, the few of us that actually like you in spite of all your efforts to get us to like you. Now that's a beautiful reframe. It blew my mind. Oh man, I was trying to get everybody to like me by proving how smart I was, and you liked me in spite of all my effort. Well, I could just relax. That was really a beginning of wisdom and really a beautiful gift that she gave me. Being able to build on your strengths, the Strengths Finder. We're finding from all the research and work that people get better and stronger, and organizations become much better by focusing on their strengths and leveraging them than actually focusing on the problems. Yes, we've solved the key problems, and we're going to get much more mileage by building on our strengths and leveraging them. Focusing on the what and the how versus the why and the who, which we've talked about briefly. There's more ways to do that. Being solution focused versus blame focused. And then finally modeling courage. The courage to be vulnerable. The courage to see current reality. The courage to confront. The courage to be confronted. The courage to learn and grow. To step into the unknown. Courage to take action. And the courage to remember to dream again and invite others and bringing in those multiple perspectives. All of those for me are typified by another client of ours, Bialik Environments, based in Rockville, Maryland. Bialik actually creates highly beautiful, aesthetic, great workspaces for people that are ergonomic and really inviting of creativity and collaboration. And they've been around for quite a while. And Joan Bialik is the CEO and chairwoman. And Joan has built the kind of culture that is caring, positive, resilient, respectful. And that models that. Sending people home, having them work distantly. And yet, Jeremy Levitt, the president, with Joan and the great executive committee that they have built, have what I think is a model of excellence around communication. Every morning, that executive committee gets together virtually and talks to each other about where things are, what's happening, what needs to happen, how people are feeling. Then each member of that executive committee calls the managers who report to them to check in with them to see how they're doing. The managers then call their team members to see how they're doing. Jeremy sends out an email at the end of the day, updating everybody in the organization about where things are and what's going on. And he personally calls periodically every major player in the organization, all of the different groups, to see how they're doing. They keep people informed, they keep people engaged, and always with that sense of caring, transparency, and vulnerability, which I think is wonderful. Again, another model of excellence, I believe, in what we do. So for us EQ, IQ, and Staub Leadership International, we believe that the future will belong to the situationally adaptive organizations that are organized around a core operating principle, a core operating sense of purpose, that have cultivated and developed positive emotional work environments where they honor and work those four emotional drivers of core orientation, of perspective, of resilience, and of confidence in terms of how we move forward.
Thank you so much, Dusty. Okay, so we're going to open it up to the Q&A. We've had quite a few come in anonymously, and then we've had a couple that are coming in now. So we'll start with the two that are open to the public. The first is, how are you personally handling this change, and how do you stay centered in the middle of everything that's going on?
That's a great question. How I stay centered is I have an incredible wife who is wonderful. We go for a walk every morning. I'm not sure that she's staying sane because of me, but I'm staying sane partly because of her. I do yoga every day. Get up, have my coffee, sit on the back porch, pray, think about the world, go upstairs, do about an hour worth of yoga, and then go for a walk. Really connecting with nature. Doing a lot of reading, a lot of reflecting. Journaling is really a way. When I start getting anxious or upset, I'll journal 5, 10, 15 minutes of writing, and all the knots inside dissolve. So it's really, those are the major tools I use.
Really good. So it sounds like a lot of movement and inward work.
Yes.
Is doing and focusing, taking advantage of right now. Okay, beautiful. The next question, well, kind of a statement, but a question here. I've had to furlough a lot of employees, and it has been hard for me to do that. I have no idea how to be supportive around this, to deal with my own anxiety, let alone theirs.
That's a tough one. I know that one of our clients, some of the key staff are feeling depressed. They had to lay off more than 100 people within the past couple of weeks. And that takes a toll on people that really care. I think the only thing you can do is you offer as much support as you can. You let people know that you haven't forgotten them. You try to turn them towards or move them towards or point them towards the best resources there. And you realize this is not a condition you created, it's a condition you're having to react to. And so the question is, are you doing all that you can? Is there something you could do that you haven't thought about doing? And if you're doing all you can do, and if you're putting them to those resources and you're staying emotionally open, then I think that that's the best that you can do, and then look for opportunities to bring them back when things turn around.
Great. Okay. Wonderful answers. We have another one. You kind of answered it there at the end. They asked, and then you kind of answered it there, but they just said that you gave a lot of really good examples about ways that we can address the uncertainty around COVID. And if you had any other suggestions on practical actions we can all do. I think you've touched on that, but if there's any other,
I think the models of excellence I talked about, the ALEC environments and Clements Worldwide, that sense of communicate to the 10th power. You cannot really over communicate in this. Let people know you're there for them. Let them know you care. Be willing to listen. Don't take on their pain, yet hear their pain. It is being transparent. Share the struggle you're going through. Share the difficulty. So it's not like, you're always smiling, everything's under control. Let them know the difficulty, that you're struggling with this too. That helps. And invite them into looking at perspectives on what can we do? How can we prepare for when we begin to be able to go back to the new norm, whatever that's going to look like? What can we be doing? So beginning to involve people in some problem solving, some dreaming, some scenario creation, gets them active and gets them feeling like they're contributing, and it helps prepare you and your organization for moving forward. I think those are all important things to do.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I would have to agree. Okay, so we have two different questions from two different people. I'm going to kind of try and put them together. The
Okay.
first is, you discuss keeping a cohesive work environment. How would you suggest maintaining the space when there isn't a physical place to do it? And also, how the heck do I manage the stress of working from home with my three kids running wild while leading my team from home? I feel like they could kind of go hand in
Yeah,
hand.
yeah. Well, gosh, we're all in a new world where we used to be able to work in the office, and now we're working remotely. And you have all these distractions, people you love, uh, dogs barking in the background, children running in. And part of it is just accepting that we're all human and we're all here and we're doing the best we can. And so I'm going to carve out as much time as I can, and I may get interrupted. And if I do, let's put a placeholder and just excuse me, I'll take a few minutes and then we'll come back. So beginning to organize your thoughts, I think charts help. Sending out messages on WhatsApp or on your internal email chain to people. If you have the ability to post some strategies and tactics and actions of where you are, that helps. Talking to your family, setting up some sort of process with them in terms of, I've got to carve out this time. Here's something you can do. It means being really creative with them. And again, it has to do with us forgiving and being more tolerant and understanding that things have shifted. And one person actually said to me, you know, everybody's talking about how they have so much time. I have less time. I'm working all the time. I'm getting called and I'm burning out. I can't stay. I keep up. And what I would say, if that's your case, is when you get that physically stressed and you're not sleeping and you're working hard, you weaken your immune system. You're more likely to get sick. And if you get sick and you can't work, you won't be there to do that for the organization. So you need to set some healthy boundaries and say, I'm available these hours. If it's a multinational organization, I can work these hours at night, these hours in the morning, and that's what I'm available. Because I've got to take care of myself and I need time to think. So you have to be able to set some boundaries with your organization, with your supervisor. That means having a proactive conversation and doing it in a very positive way, and doing it in a positive tone. And I can really do great work for you here. Here's where I need to take care of myself. Otherwise, I'll get sick. I will not be available. So it's
Wow.
that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would have to say that while it seems simple, boundary work right now more than ever is most important. That tail, like, you know, the old saying, you got to put your oxygen mask on before you can put on others. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
So absolutely. I think that for, especially now, boundaries with kids, with family, with colleagues, with bosses, because it's easier now. Well, you're working from home, right? So people think you can, right. So I think we can all relate to that. Boundary work, especially right now, is extremely important. We have another question. Some change seems overwhelming for a lot of people. How do you cope with that?
Well, I'm an Army brat. I was in 10 different schools the first 10 years of schooling. Um, I learned to be resilient. I learned to bounce back. Um, I learned to be centered in myself, because every year I was losing all my friends and had to make new friends. And there's a lot of grief. I learned that writing was one way, writing out my emotions, writing my feelings. For me, writing some poetry. I found that time alone in the woods, nature, just walking an hour or two in the trees, or walking outside, just looking at the sky. Time to kind of daydream. And then when I got into yoga, the physical yoga, the meditation with that, all of those are ways in which I keep myself centered and take care of myself. And I've gone through some really massive changes in my life. It certainly has helped me when I've dealt with significant loss, like when my sister died, and father, and two friends, and so forth. So those are ways in which I center myself and take care of myself.
Thank you. That was a very vulnerable answer. And, you know, they say the only constant in life is change.
Yes.
So it sounds like you're saying really finding a practice and finding what grounds you and centers you, but it sounds like those things, and which, you know, a lot of people are struggling right now with walking in bigger cities that don't have land. So that kind of goes on to, someone asked, how do they deal with the fear that things might get worse before they get better? And, the things that maybe they once did to ground themselves, like going into nature, now it's not as socially acceptable. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the Greek philosopher Heraclitus said, you can never step into the same river twice. Well, when the river goes to storm surge and it's flooding everything and washing things away, yeah, you certainly don't want to try to step in that river. You have to run. But when we're dealing with the fear of change, we're dealing with that anxiety, just know it's going to happen. It's going to occur. The great Spanish flu pandemic, I think it was 1918. The Great Recession 10 years ago, or decession, if you want to call it, the Depression back in the 30s. There's going to be changes. There's going to be difficulties. We're human beings. There's going to be challenges. And that goes back to the confidence issue. Congratulations, you've already survived the worst things that have happened to you. Knowing that, you have the creativity to see things in a new way. Knowing who you are, orienting there, connecting with people, building your resilience physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. Those are the ways in which you're going to be able to deal with this so that you're not overwhelmed. And worrying about the future doesn't prepare you for the future. What's likely to happen and what can I do? What are some steps I can take? And if I'm running out of ideas, who can I talk to who might have some ideas on what I can do to take care of myself if this happens, or this happens, or this happens? And just focus on centering yourself. Just stepping outside. One exercise is taking 5 slow, deep breaths, paying attention to my breath, letting the anxiety flow out with each breath and breathing in. There's a whole set of tools and exercises you can do. That's one that always centering on your breath is very helpful.
Yeah, that seems important. I've heard you speak on that before, taking steps now so that when the world opens back up, right, it's not as overwhelming. And yeah, very important. Okay.
Yep.
We are going to ask 2, maybe 3 more questions because we're about to be out of time. So next question we have is, feeling safe the most important need during this pandemic? And if so, how best do we begin to address helping people get in the feeling of a safe space again?
I don't know that feeling safe is the most important emotion. I think certainly it's one of the most important emotions. I think feeling maybe a sense of there's some security, a sense of some hope that I'll get through this, will be okay, a sense of being supported, a sense that I'm cared for, a sense of being loved. All of those are really important aspects too. You can be safe and deadly lonely. People felt very safe and deadly lonely have committed suicide. All the money in the world, all the safety in the world won't bring you joy or satisfaction. It has to do with the state of mind. It has to do with the quality and state of your heart. Are you feeding your heart? Are you feeding your head with positive thoughts? The world is not as we see it. The world tends to be as we perceive it. And can I perceive it in a different way? What's the advantage? What's the solution space I could move into? How could I use this to take care of myself in a new way? And how can I use this to connect or take a look at myself and say, if I've been living the way I want to, is there a better way moving forward? And then taking those actions and being part of a community, being part of a ability to talk to other people, to share ideas. Was in a Zoom call with a bunch of people in a community that we're part of. And it just felt really good listening to people share their concerns, sharing what they were doing to take care of themselves. You felt like you weren't alone. And I felt fed. So what are we doing to feed our hearts? How can we feed our hearts? How can we feed the hearts of those around us? I think that's a really important piece to this too.
Wonderful question. We had a comment. I have 2 college students, my wife and a gifted teacher, and they asked me, "Are you ready for tomorrow?"
That's a great comment. And I would say, you know what I'm doing? Here's what I'm doing to get ready for tomorrow. Do you have some other ideas? And what can we do to be ready for tomorrow as a family, I would turn around and invite them to look at that. And I think part of it is humility. We can learn from the youngest person. Also, is the confidence we'll get through this. It's the willingness to be vulnerable. It's that willingness to really connect, I think makes a big, big difference. And
Yeah. Oh,
there are some, so other questions?
No, if you want to say a few last things, we're gonna
Yep.
slowly wrap this up. So.
All right. I want to talk about some actions you can take. People have been listening. And there are 5 things that you can do. And the first one is what I would say is facilitate a conversation with those in your family, facilitate a conversation with those in your organization, facilitate a conversation with your leadership team, a conversation with your colleagues, if it's a YPO chapter or if it's a community group or it's an association. Begin to facilitate a conversation around some of these things we talked about. The 2 kinds of change, the different approaches to dealing with change, the emotional drivers, those key emotional drivers. Also invite multiple perspectives. Ask people to play with scenario creation and opportunities, like Tarun has been doing with the group at Clements Worldwide. Stay solution focused. The president of Staub Leadership happens to be Christine Staub, and she has a term I like, which is called be solutionary. Be solutionary. Be focused on solutions. What can we do as opposed to why is this happening? Why is this? What can we do? What do we want to have happen? How can we make it happen? So that's key. 4th thing is ensure there's resonance. Make sure that you're connecting, that there's an emotional connectivity. I remember when 9/11 occurred and the Twin Towers came down in New York, I was working at Novartis Animal Health, doing a big training with 60 people. And somebody came in the room and said, you've got to turn on the TV. We did. And we watched the first tower come down. We were just mesmerized. The second tower came down. And the senior leader came in and said, everybody go home. Everybody go be with your family. And they did that. They forget the work. Go take care of your family. Be home. Another client I won't mention insisted everybody come to work the next day. Insisted that people stay until the end of the day. Well, a year later, there some key people at Novartis told me they'd been planning to leave, but after the caring, the support they felt from the organization, they recommitted and they decided to stay. Some of the brightest and best at the other organization left. They said they broke faith with me. When I realized that they only saw me as somebody to produce work rather than somebody they really cared about, that was it. So connect, and there's resonance. And have the courage to be vulnerable. There's no substitute for that. So a wonderful TED Talk by Brene Brown on the power of vulnerability. I've been talking about it for a long time. She did a beautiful job. She did the research that backed up everything I'd been saying, which was wonderful. And it's great. Millions of people have seen it. If you need to understand why vulnerability is important, especially now in change, see her TED Talk. Finally, the 5th thing you could do is you could sign up. We're going to do a 4-part deep dive series into the mechanics of how to do all of these things around change, around how to reframe and shift perception, about how to use powerful questions and engage people, how to begin to create scenarios, how to use more active imagination and creativity, and understanding how to change the operating system, the rules of the road. So if you're interested, we'll let us know and we'll sign you up. Thank you. And Kendra?
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dusty. Okay, we'll wrap this up. Okay. We just wanted to say thank you so much for being on here. We trust that you have taken some value from this webinar, hopefully, and the perspectives and approaches to second level disruptive change. In addition, we will be sending all attendees a copy of the slides from this presentation. So if you were taking notes and you didn't get everything, then there you have it. And we invite you to think about ways that you can apply some of the insights that were shared. If you want to further develop your change mastery skills, then consider signing up for our upcoming 4-session interactive online training, as Dusty just mentioned, a deeper dive into change dynamic processes and skills. And you can look for information on that in your inboxes. Again, from all of us at EQIQ and Staub Leadership International, we want to thank you for your time. We hope you're staying safe and well. And if you have any questions or there's a way that we can help you during this time, please feel free to reach out because we are here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Really appreciate that. Blessings.